Hello, and welcome to our snow day makeup online course. So, as you know, today I was going to talk about functional analysis and talk about two classic studies from Awada that focused on functional assessments. And then the rest of there's an online course next week. Then there's vacation, so there's nothing, spring vacation, and then there's another online course after that. And so the next two classes that are online are focusing on some of the variations to these sort of classic functional analyses that have been demonstrated. So I wanted to talk about some of these, and I'm going to start with the first one, which was the Awada article that was originally published in 1982 in Analysis and Intervention in Developmental Disabilities, but that's a journal that became defunct, and not a lot of people actually read it, so it was republished again in 1994 in Java, and that's probably that's where you might see it more likely at this point. Up until this point, people were talking about things, and this focuses on SIB, but now, of course, we know functional analyses can be done for any topography of behavior, even for behaviors that we want to increase. There's some very cool studies that are going on right now in the school system around teaching individuals math skills and spelling skills and arithmetic skills using a functional analysis in order to identify the interventions or intervention which would be most successful. So you can use a functional assessment to look at any target behavior to either decrease it or increase it. Essentially what you're doing is you're trying to identify the antecedents and the consequences, what's maintaining it. So now, and up until this point in 1982, it is not the case that no one did functional analyses. Carr talked about functional analyses. A couple of other people did. I think the big difference was, and why this article is probably, although I don't know that to be true, but if I had to guess, I'd say this article is probably the most popular, most frequently cited article in Java, probably the most cited article in our whole field in applied behavior analysis, is that what Awada did is he made doing a functional analysis, which of course we knew about in 1982, but he sort of brought it to the people. He broke it down into these 4 conditions and specifically told people how you could conduct these 4 conditions in order to do this. And I think that's what made it really useful for practitioners and for other people, is instead of just saying, well, we need to identify the antecedents and do it as an experiment and do a functional analysis and the consequences, he actually said, okay, here's how you do it. You break it down this way. All right. So basically what this article does is describe a methodology to assess the functional relationship between, in this case, self-injury and environmental events. So in this study, there were 9 participants. They were children and adolescents with intellectual disabilities and SIB. He ran 15-minute conditions. Typically now people run a lot shorter conditions, as you'll see in the next couple of weeks. First condition was a social disapproval condition, which consisted of a therapist and a participant in the room. So the critical issues with each of these conditions is there's both antecedent and there's consequences. And of course, because this is a functional analysis, it's really, if you will, an experiment, and so you're actually manipulating things. You're not just watching. So that is, as we've been talking about, the big difference between the functional analysis and any kind of descriptive assessment. I mean, in a sense, it is a direct assessment, but how it's different than a descriptive direct assessment is that you're actually manipulating the variables. So, in a social disapproval condition, the therapist was in the room with a participant. The participant had toys. The therapist instructed the child to play while the therapist did some work. The therapist ignored the child until he or she engaged in SIB. At that point, the therapist made statements of concern, such as, "Oh, don't hurt yourself." And if the child's SIB was maintained by this type of adult attention, then you would expect high rates of SIB in this condition. So this condition was developed in order to try to reenact, if you will, how someone who's attention motivated might respond, except instead of it being on some kind of schedule and it gets reinforced some of the times and not others, because it is a functional analysis, because it is an experiment, you just reinforce it every single time it occurs. So you never pay attention to the child if they're engaging in appropriate behavior, but every time they engage in self-injury, you make some kind of statement of concern. So if it is attention motivated, and that kind of attention, saying, for example, "don't hurt yourself," is what's reinforcing, excuse me, you would expect that this under these conditions, in this 15-minute condition, you'd get a lot of SIB. All right, another is a demand condition, which gets at negative reinforcement. So you have a therapist and a participant alone in a room. The therapist is placing some kind of demands. Now, these original studies were all academic demands, but sometimes academic demands aren't, in fact, what the person wants to escape or avoid. It could be other kind of demands. But in this case, it was all academic demands. If the student engaged in SIB, the therapist turned away from the student for 30 seconds. Again, to mimic, if you will, what a well-intentioned teacher might do. If the student engages in SIB, they'd say, okay, you're not ready for this, and give them a little break until they calm down. So that's what they did here. If the student engaged in SIB, the therapist turned away from the student for 30 seconds. If the student's SIB was maintained by escape or avoidance, then one would expect to see higher rates of SIB in this condition relative to the other conditions. So we have social disapproval, which gets at positive attention. We got demand that gets at negative reinforcement, escape or avoid, and then we have an alone condition, which, as the name implies, the student is in a room alone, without access to toys or other materials that might provide stimulation. Again, what WADA is trying to reenact here is a condition of where there is not any stimulation available, and that might be a condition that would support someone who engages in self-injury in order to get some kind of stimulation, which has now come to be called automatic reinforcement. So if it was highest in this condition relative to the other conditions, then that would suggest that the child's SIB was maintained by self-stimulatory or automatic variables. We'll talk more about this, but this alone condition, these self-stimulatory, or because actually in the next study we'll read is when the term automatic was actually first used. Automatic is really a better term because this is really a default condition. We say it's alone if there just don't seem to be any social variables. So, for example, even a mental health problem, if an individual, for example, is fine when they're, let's say they're schizophrenic, duly diagnosed, a person with intellectual disability and a mental health problem. And let's say they're schizophrenic. And so when their schizophrenia is not kicked in, they do fine, and they don't engage in self-injurious behavior. However, when they start hearing voices or seeing things and are no longer in touch with reality, that's when the SIB starts kicking in. Well, that's not a social variable. It really would be called an automatic one. Finally, there was a control condition, which is an unstructured play, which consists of a therapist and a participant in a room playing. So the idea of this condition was, all right, let's have everything going on. There's adequate attention, but there aren't demands, so we're not really placing demands. We're doing whatever you want to do, and I'm going to provide all the attention that I can. Plus, there's tons of stimulation. We're going to do all this fun and exciting stuff. And you would expect that in this condition, generally there would be little or no self-injury. All right. Well, so basically the results, Iwata used an alternating treatment design, which you see in Figure 2. He initially did this other thing that's in Figure 1, which he never did again because, well, it's really hard to understand and really doesn't make much sense. So the alternating treatment design really makes a lot more sense, and it's what has pretty much been used for functional analyses. We'll talk about some other designs that are used, but primarily this is the design that you see. Hopefully, yes, you guys all know about alternating treatment designs. And the other common result was that, in fact, as he predicted, the play condition was generally low across all participants. And then if you look at Figure 2, you see some general kind of patterns. So for child 1, for example, he is highest in academic conditions suggesting demand, was what was maintaining this person's self-injury. In child 4, on the other hand, seemed to be highest in the alone condition, which suggests that their self-injury was maintained by non-social factors, so automatic. Child 5, as you could see, was generally highest in the social disapproval condition, suggesting that her behavior was maintained by attention. And then you got child 2, where, well, it doesn't look like there really was any differentiation at all. And sometimes this happens because you just didn't hit on the right variables. For example, and we get at this and see this a lot more now in what I would call contemporary functional analyses, is an individual might be their target behavior might be maintained by some form of attention, but it isn't this form of attention. It has to be a very specific kind of attention, maybe by a specific person under certain conditions. And that's where functional analyses can be really useful, is to try to identify what is it? How does that particular kind of attention, and you'll read a study in not next week, the week after, I can't remember, that was recently done that talked about divided attention. So it wasn't just attention, but it had to be a certain kind of attention in order for that person to engage in aggression. So that's probably what was going on here with child 2, is that Iwata just wasn't focused in on exactly what the specific variables were. All right, so the implications of the study are that SIB did vary both between and within individuals. Again, remember, in 1982, when this was published, in the early 80s, late 70s, even though we did have functional analyses, people were really still thinking about a particular treatment. So, what is the best treatment? Oh, well, you should attend to kids who engage in SIB. That seems to work. Oh, no, you should ignore kids who have SIB. That really seems to work, etc. So, as opposed to that, what this study really demonstrated, and really it's a hallmark of our field right now, is that we assume that behaviors can be maintained by anything. There aren't treatments that are effective for particular topographies of problem behavior. You have to pick a particular treatment based on the assessment results from that individual. He also found that in 6 of the 9 participants, there were higher levels of SIB consistently associated with a specific stimulus condition. Okay. All right, so this second study, the Iwata 1994, now that's a interesting study, because it really, at this point, 12 years later, there were a decade's worth of data, and these programs and these SIB centers that started at Kennedy Krieger, and then Brian Iwata took it to Florida, but it also continued at Kennedy, and a couple other places started doing some. So all of these people were collecting data, and Iwata took it all and tried to put it together, 152 cases over 11 years, and to try to summarize what exactly do we know now about SIB. Again, this is talking about SIB, but everything that we're saying about SIB, you can generalize to anything. It does not have to just do with SIB. That's pretty clear at this point. So one of the things he summarized that I talked about last time was the designs. So there's primarily, as I said, there is the design that was used is a alternating treatment, also called a multi-element design. Multi-element is sort of an older term. I don't know why someone changed the name and now they call it alternating treatment design. Some people like me call it both. I think just to make the test harder, I'm not sure. But so it's also called a multi-element or alternating treatment design. But in this design, you're conducting each of these conditions, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And you're just noting if it occurs higher in one condition relative to the other. So this is pretty clear that it's highest in the attention condition, suggesting that for this individual, their SIB is maintained by positive attention. Another design you see a lot less frequently, but you will see, are reversal designs where you go from condition to condition to condition to condition. The reason you might do that is that this is quick and easy. I mean, there's a lot less, if you count up the number of points here, of time, you could run 5 of these in one day. As opposed to, the total amount of running each of these. But sometimes the individual doesn't discriminate among these conditions. So even though they might be attention motivated, they're still not really discriminating that in the demand condition they're not going to get any attention. So they're engaging in SIB in all of the conditions. Sometimes if there's problems with discrimination, a reversal design, because now the person, you're not running multiple conditions to confuse them. It's just one at a time, and they can figure it out more quickly. And this can reveal a pattern sometimes better than that. The gosh, why is this happening? Sorry. The pairwise condition is really more common now than it was back then when Iwata was looking at these, because people don't run multiple conditions like this anymore. They'll do a good descriptive assessment. They'll have a really good idea what they think the conditions are. They'll use the functional analysis, and you're going to read a study or two that does this. And they'll look at just one condition versus a control condition. So like attention versus play, and demonstrate control that way. All right, so let's quickly go through what Iwata found in these 152 cases. So here's some common patterns. So in terms of positive reinforcement, well, you can get a pattern like this first one where it doesn't occur very frequently, but when it does, it's going to occur only in the attention condition, never occur in anything else. Okay, that clearly demonstrates its attention. Probably the more common kind is like number 69 here, where they engaged in the behavior in SIB across all conditions. Again, probably because of discrimination issues, or there might be some other factors that have something to do with maintaining their behavior, but clearly much highest in one condition, in this case the attention condition. So that's an example of these two, for example. Really, all of these are examples of that. Now, a really interesting pattern is for this A53, where SIB was happening under all conditions, as you can see, and even under a regular attention condition, but it wasn't any higher necessarily than the other conditions until they modified the attention condition so that it was continuous attention, non-contingent continuous attention. That's what the person really wanted, and then under those conditions the SIB dropped out entirely. So it's just the opposite. We learned, and you can learn either way. You could either identify conditions under which the behavior never occurs, if it occurs high in many conditions, because all of these conditions, demand, well, not alone, and play, are going to have some kind of an attention component. Even the alone can have an attention component. It's complicated, but why does my arrow just keep disappearing like that? But think about it. If you put somebody in a room and they're attention motivated, well, you're going to get what? An extinction burst. Well, that extinction burst can go on for a while, particularly if they figure out you're going to let them out in 15 minutes. And so if they're continuing to engage in the SIB, for example, and then after 15 minutes you let them out, to them, they just got reinforced for engaging in the SIB, reinforced with attention. Now there's people there who were with them. So it's possible that even with an alone condition that's high, it could be consistent with attention motivation. But it was lowest under these conditions where there was non-contingent attention, suggesting, okay, that is exactly what this person wants, intensive attention. Now, also, the social positive reinforcement, the reason it's called that and not attention is it's not always just attention. There could be other tangible items that the individual really wants to earn or to get as a function of engaging in SIB. So in this case, it was a particular tangible item, and in this case, it was food, for example. Negative reinforcement. Okay, escape or avoiding. Same patterns. You can get some, like in D9, that are there's not a lot of SIB target behavior that's occurring. It's just a little bit, but when it does occur, it's during a demand, and that suggests that it is negative reinforcement that's maintaining the behavior. The more typical are like these, where you're going to get a little bit in some of the other conditions, but the most in demand situations. D145 is another interesting case because, again, there's a person present in all of these conditions except for the alone, and so this guy was the master of escape, really wanted to get away from all human beings, and so he engaged in high rates of SIB just to get away from everybody. So this is clearly negative reinforcement, but a different pattern where he's high in every condition except under that condition when there's absolutely nobody there for him to escape from. D45, you're going to read more about him when you do... We talk about negative reinforcement, and I have a video of all of these conditions, and I have a video of this guy, which, despite being a certified online instructor, I cannot figure out how to get the DVD on this. So I will show it to you in class next time we get together of this individual. But so his demands weren't typical in terms of, his SIB was clearly motivated by escape, but had nothing to do with demands. He would do whatever you asked him to do. He really was a very compliant kid. But if you asked him any medical demand, or if you even engaged in any kind of medical conversation, he would engage in SIB just to get you to go away. And then D51, the case of it's really the only demand was specifically self-care. So again, this is a case where we're starting to break things down, that it isn't necessarily just academic demands or a particular kind of demand, that sometimes you're going to do a functional analysis and you do a little pairwise one that we talked about because you're just trying to identify what the specific event is that is so aversive to this individual that they're willing to engage in this target behavior just to get you to stop doing it. And of course, that could be very, very specific. All right, here's the automatic conditions. This one gets even more challenging. You know, they're easy if it's highest in alone, like these, and even these. But these are the ones that look a little weird. Sometimes, if it's automatic, that means there's not a social component. Well, it might not just be high in alone, but it would be arguably high under all conditions, right? Because it's self-stimulatory. The person doesn't care if you're placing demands or you're not, or you're giving him attention or you're not. He's not paying attention. He doesn't care. All he cares about is the stimulation. Or the example of the person with the mental health issue. Regardless of what's going on in the environment, what's really important is if he's having a mental health crisis at that particular time. So he would be high in every condition or low in every condition. It would only depend when he's having a mental health crisis. But these are harder to interpret when they're really high. Generally, the rule of thumb is, although this really is more of an art than a science, is if it's really high across all the conditions. So no matter what you're doing, this person is engaging in high rates of SIB. That suggests it's probably an automatic function. If it's moderate to low rates across all conditions, that probably suggests that we haven't teased out exactly what's going on here yet. All right, then of course there's multiple control. So a certain percentage of these 152 cases had multiple control and were undifferentiated. So here's some multiple control, attention and demand clearly up, attention and alone clearly up, demand and alone clearly up. And then undifferentiated, as I said, low across the board suggests we just haven't found the right variable. The right variable yet. And low and moderate across the board suggest the same thing. All right, I want to spend a little bit of time on this because I think this is really the essence of what this whole class is about, and really the essence of what your final exam is about, which is we talked about the various kinds of functional assessments that you can do, and then based upon those functional assessments, it's coming up with treatments that are based on those assessments. Sorry, I repeated myself. So I want you to spend some time with this, and if you're having trouble with it, since I can't get any feedback from you right now, you could put it in the discussion board and we can talk about it more. But it's very important, I think, that you understand what this figure is talking about. Let me see if I can try to explain it. So for social positive reinforcement, so these are individuals that would be high in the social disapproval condition, for example, for people who their target behavior is maintained by attention. There's antecedent events that you could use, such as non-contingent reinforcement. Well, great. Non-contingent reinforcement for a person whose target behavior is maintained by attention would be non-contingently attending to the person. Under those conditions, that's wildly successful. So these stripes mean that's how many of these cases were successful, and the dark is the total applications. So the vast majority, 90% of interventions that included non-contingent reinforcement for individuals whose target behavior was maintained by social positive reinforcement were successful. And that makes sense. that if a person's doing it for attention, an easy way, and I don't know why more people don't do it this way because it's so easy, an easy way to address that is provide non-contingent attention all the time. The target behavior will decrease. Easy peasy. All right, let's look at an extinction procedure. Well, as we've always said, extinction is a big part of any of these treatments. So if the person's doing it to get attention, extinction would consist of what? Well, if you were there, you would say it would consist of not providing attention when the person engages in SIB. Now, practically easier to say than do, because in some cases you might have to provide some kind of attention, but let's say we can do it. And when you can, again, not surprisingly, the vast majority of these interventions are successful. Sure, if a person is engaging in SIB, heck, let's do them both. Let's combine both of these. Let's give him non-contingent attention all the time, and if he does engage in SIB, let's make sure that we don't give him any attention. Okay, we'll read about some studies that do exactly that. So another intervention might be some kind of differential reinforcement, which is really what I just described. So you would reinforce the person with attention for the absence of SIB, but if they ever engaged in it, you wouldn't provide any attention. Okay, so that really is the combination of extinction and positive reinforcement. And under those conditions, again, the vast majority, 80% or so, of those kinds of interventions were successful. On the other hand, when we look at punishment procedures, verbal reprimands, so just telling the person, hey, don't do that, were never successful. But of course, that makes sense. Why would they be? Because the person wants attention, so verbal reprimands are really just going to reinforce the behavior. Timeout, on the other hand, can be successful with a person whose target behavior is maintained by attention because, well, they want attention. If they're in timeout, by definition, they're not getting attention, so that would probably work. There's water mist. See, Andy, you're not the only one who's used water mist, and not successful. It looks like that may be one case, and it wasn't successful. The other thing, response interruption. Well, of course, it was never successful, but response interruption, what does that mean? Well, that means you're blocking the behavior for a person who's attention motivated. That's probably going to reinforce the behavior. So, of course, that would not be successful. All right, so we can go down the list and do all of these. Let's do them for demands, social negative. Again, non-contingent reinforcement. You guys are going to read some articles. So if you're not understanding exactly what I'm saying, you're going to read some of these articles. Tim Vollmer is the non-contingent guru, so you're going to read a couple of his articles where he does do non-contingent reinforcement for attention-motivated behavior and non-contingent reinforcement for social negative reinforcement behavior that's maintained by negative reinforcement. Now, what would non-contingent reinforcement look like for someone who's doing it to escape or avoid? Well, it wouldn't be attention because, well, that in fact would be just the opposite from what they want because they want to get away from you. So non-contingent reinforcement for negative reinforcement would actually be allowing the person to escape. So just saying non-contingently for someone who doesn't want to be doing, let's say you're doing, a person's doing difficult math problems, and they're more inclined to engage in the target behavior when they're doing these math problems because they want to escape or avoid. Well, you would non-contingently say, okay, hey, let's just take a break. And maybe start off with, and Tim Vollmer, you'll read an article that talks about this, start off with a really high rate of that, where the person might only do one of 20 problems at first. So he's taking breaks all the time. So, hey, let's take another break. Let's just take a break. Let's take 5. So that's non-contingent escape. Again, not surprisingly, well, that really works well. Non-contingent escape works as well as non-contingent with someone whose target behavior is maintained by negative reinforcement, works as well as non-contingent attention does for a person whose target behavior is maintained by social positive attention. All right, task modification. Hey, that's a great antecedent event. Again, I think I probably represent all 15 of those or 12 of those cases. I don't know why other people don't do this. It's so much easier, this antecedent stuff, with people who are trying to escape or avoid. Well, why don't we just, if they're having problems with these math problems, why don't we just modify the math problems? We'll make them a lot easier. We'll gradually fade in the more complicated ones based on their behavior. If they start to have trouble, we'll go back and fade them out. So task modification is wildly successful, but just not used that much. On the other hand, extinction. Well, extinction for negative reinforcement means you're not going to allow them, attention extinction. So you're not going to, you're going to turn away from them and not provide any attention if they engage in SIB. Well, of course, if the person's doing it to escape from you, that's exactly what they're looking for. So, of course, this would not be successful. So, allowing them to escape, turning away from them, just like you're doing up here with the attention person, is not going to be very successful with these guys because that's exactly what they want. On the other hand, escape extinction, which is not allowing them to escape, on the other hand, which means you're providing a ton of attention, is very successful because it's what they maintain. Differential reinforcement, again, that's always going to work, but it's going to be very different for someone who's attention motivated versus someone who's motivated by escape or avoidance. So you're going to allow them to escape or avoid contingent on not engaging in the target behavior. And if they do engage in the target behavior, then you're not going to allow them to escape or avoid. It can be very successful. On the other hand, once again, our old friend, the verbal reprimands, yelling at kids. Gee, I don't get it. Yelling at kids, it doesn't work, does it? Well, yelling at adults doesn't really work. Yelling at your dogs really doesn't work either. I think basically verbal reprimands just don't work. But in this case, they don't work because the person's trying to escape. So verbal reprimands aren't going to be successful. Now, in this case, time out, of course, is not going to be successful at all because that's exactly what they want. If they engage in SIB and you say, fine, time out, well, yeah, that's exactly what they want because they're trying to get out of the demand. All right, I think you got it. And then we'll talk about automatic, but you'll see there's a lot of black in automatic, and we'll spend more time, and I think most of you have quite a bit of experience, so you understand why that's so hard. And part of the problem is because It's really hard to do extinction with sensory extinction with automatic behaviors. I mean, you're going to read an article by Arnie Rinkover from 1979 when, Arnie could put blindfolds on kids or put boxing gloves on their hands. And sure enough, self-stimulatory behavior went away. But obviously today we don't want to be doing those kinds of things. So it is really hard really to figure out how to turn automatic behavior around, because we don't really understand it, because it's a default condition. So we don't really know what exactly is maintaining it, and therefore it's virtually impossible to do realistic extinction. And we don't know exactly what to reinforce. So it's really a difficult one. So I guess my point is, since I don't have a feel for you guys of whether you got this or not, is I'm going to stop going through these. I can go through more of them. But spend some time with this. If you have problems with it, either put something in the discussion format and we'll talk about it, because we're not going to get back together again till April. Or you could email me privately if you want, and I'll talk about it. Or keep your questions, and next time we get together in April, I will, I think it's April 2nd, we certainly could talk about that. But make sure you understand this table and it makes sense to you, because this is really the essence of what this course is. You do a good functional assessment, whether that includes a functional analysis or not, but you do a good one, and then you come up with a treatment based upon the results of that assessment. And there's tons of data, just like this, to support that some of these treatments are really going to be successful and some of them aren't. All right. So, the implications of this big fat 1994 study of 152 individuals are: functional analysis is highly effective approach for identifying contingencies that maintain an individual's behavior. Yes. Knowledge about behavioral function can and should determine the course of treatment. Yes, that's that graph we were just looking at. And these data suggest that SIB is a social disorder, suggesting that many individuals have not acquired socially appropriate means of gaining attention, access to desired items, or escaping undesired situations, underscoring the importance of teaching and reinforcing replacement behaviors. That is, teaching people behaviors to get out of what they don't want to do, and that allow them to get access to what they do. I would argue, and I don't think this is a novel argument, that the only reason that you and I are not self-injurious or physically aggressive is because we do have a lot of ways of getting what we want most of the time. And avoiding or escaping things that we don't want most of the time. However, a lot of the individuals that we work with intellectual disabilities don't have those other behaviors, and so therefore they are forced to resort to a gross behavior, SIB, physical aggression, disruption, spitting, but highly effective way of being able to do that. So all of this just really goes back and reinforces the fact that we could probably prevent a lot of these behaviors if we spent more time making sure that we are teaching people meaningful skills and ways of being able to get what they want, getting access to what they want, and escaping what they don't want. The other thing is negative reinforcement accounted for the largest proportion of SIB, and that's certainly my opinion too, is negative reinforcement is the primary motivator of a lot of disruptive behavior. That is, it isn't because somebody wants something, it's just that they just are tired of it. They don't want any more of that. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about negative reinforcement later on in the semester. But right now we're just talking about the functional analysis part, so I don't want to get too far afield. But we'll come back to those issues. I think there's a lot of great discussion points here, and this would have been a great time that we could have had a lively discussion, but I'm just talking to myself now, so I'll move on. All right, so that was it for today. As I said, I think we would have had a nice discussion at this point, but I want to talk about the next couple of weeks. Just to remind you, next week is an online class, so that is week 7. And that's when we're going to start talking about some of the variations to functional analysis. So these are the 15-minute, the 4 conditions, the strength, as I said before, I believe, of these studies is Awada was able to sort of take functional analysis and break it out so that everybody could understand it and everybody could use it. So you use these 4 conditions. That's it. It was these 4 conditions. This is how you ran them. Now, however, we have evolved, as our field has evolved. Andy doesn't use water mist anymore. We've all evolved. So now you're going to start reading in next week about some variations. So, hey, can we make these things shorter? I mean, why? I don't have 6 months to do a functional analysis. I'm exaggerating. But I don't have 2 months to do a functional analysis, or a month, or even 2 weeks. Can we do shorter versions? And Wacker and Northrop will talk about that. What about the target behaviors? Self-injurious behavior, physical aggression. Wow, those are dangerous behaviors. And what's the ethics of, allowing a person to do that? And that's something, we need to talk about. But there are ways to get around that today. And so you'll read an article where the target behavior for a brain-injured guy who was very, very physically, I worked with this guy, very physically aggressive, big guy, knew how to fight, very dangerous guy, could rip up a place in 2 minutes. I think he was probably a good bar fighter too, before his brain injury. But we were able to use a different target behavior, which were obscenities. And so we never had to get to the physical aggression and the property destruction. You're going to read, I think, a very cool study by a pre-doc of mine last year, who he just published this study with an interesting functional analysis, which I really think captures kind of everything there is about a contemporary functional analysis. The whole thing consisted of like 4 data points. It was all done in a week and a half. And it was done in class, part of the students' class. Very typical of the way functional analyses are done right now, and much different, much more user-friendly than the old ones. Then the following week, week 8, is spring break, and I assume all you guys will be going to Florida, so we won't have any assignments. There won't be any class. Then week 9 is another online class, and you're going to finish up looking at functional analyses. There's a chapter that came out in 2013 that's pretty good, that sort of summarizes everything that I just said. I could have saved me and you an hour here and probably just let you read that chapter. So you'll read that, and then Tim Vollmer has a study that I always thought it's not cited very much, and I'm surprised. I really think it's a very cool study, but he kind of talks about how functional analyses, when do you use it? When do you use a descriptive assessment? When do you do a simple, short, brief functional assessment like Northrop is going to talk about? When do you do an extended one? When do you do alternating treatment design versus a reversal design? And he sort of lays out this whole little map as to how to do that. And then we will get back together April 2nd when all the snow will be gone, the birds will be out, it'll be nice and warm. And we'll start talking about treatment options at that point. And that's when Christine is presenting the Piazza article, Debbie's going to present the Fisher article, and Connor's going to present the Borello article on the 2nd. But I will spend a few minutes just talking about, now that we've done assessments, what are some of the considerations to putting together a treatment, because really the only reason we do an assessment is so that we can put together an effective treatment. So it really all comes down to the treatment. The assessment is sort of behind the scenes work, although I find it the most interesting part. But it all really comes down to the treatment. All right, if you have any questions, hopefully this thing will work and it'll download. Sometimes it takes an hour or two, but hopefully it'll download. Sorry that we missed class today, but hopefully this will work for you. Email me or put something in the discussion board if you have any questions or any comments. And I feel like I won't see you for a long time, and it's really true. I won't see you for almost a month. I won't see you until April 2nd. So have fun, enjoy the thaw, and I will see you when there's no more snow.